I was standing in my driveway, coffee in hand, watching the sun come up when a black SUV with no plates rolled up and parked right in front of my house. Out stepped three men dressed like police officers, except something felt off. Their uniforms didn't have any clear department logos. Their badges looked like something you'd find in a Halloween store. And their so-called police car had tinted windows and zero official markings. One of them walked up, trying to act tough, and slapped a folded paper against my chest. "We have a warrant," he said. I glanced at the document, and that's when my heart stopped, not because of the fake badge or phony tone, but because I recognized the name of the judge printed at the bottom. It was my son. Now, before I get ahead of myself, let me tell you, I've lived in this neighborhood for over 20 years. Never had a serious issue until recently, when a group of residents decided to form a so-called neighborhood security council, basically a fake HOA that thinks it runs the block. They've been harassing people with fines, threatening letters, and now, apparently, impersonating law enforcement. I've been documenting it all, but today, they took it way too far. The moment I saw my son's name on that paper, I knew something shady was going on. He's a real judge, yes, but there's no way he'd authorize anything for these guys. That's when it hit me. Someone forged it. But they didn't know who they were messing with. See, I raised my son to stand for justice, and now they've dragged his name into their scam. What happened next will make your jaw drop, because the trap they set for me, it ended up snapping shut right on them. I didn't say a word at first. I just stared at the paper, then at the men pretending to be officers. One of them tried to act impatient, demanding I let them in or they'd have to escalate it. I kept calm, but inside, my blood was boiling. I knew this wasn't a real warrant, and the fact that they used my son's name, who actually works for the county court, meant someone either did some serious digging or made a very stupid mistake. My son may be a judge, but he doesn't deal with anything like HOA nonsense. These people weren't just pushing boundaries anymore, they were crossing legal lines. They clearly didn't understand. It all started a few months back when this self-declared HOA showed up out of nowhere. No official vote, no city paperwork. Nothing. Just a group of neighbors who decided they were in charge. They began handing out notices, talking about community standards and threatening fines if your grass was too long or if your mailbox wasn't the right shade of beige. Most people ignored them at first until they started placing liens and getting aggressive. That's when I started keeping records, photos, videos, and even audio when they came knocking with bogus citations. I wasn't the only one who stood up to them, but I was probably the most vocal. I had filed a few complaints to the city, and word must have gotten around that I wasn't backing down. That's likely why they targeted me. But dragging my son into this, that changed everything. It felt personal now, not just some petty neighborhood power play. And the way these fake officers moved, they weren't amateurs. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. And whoever it was, they clearly thought they could intimidate me. They were wrong. Very wrong. I stepped back slowly and told the so-called officers I wasn't opening the door without confirming the warrant. One of them smirked and said, "Go ahead. Call the courthouse." They clearly thought they were one step ahead. But what they didn't know was that my son and I talk almost every morning. I excused myself calmly, walked inside, and locked the door behind me. While they waited outside, acting like they had legal power, I was already on the phone with my son. His voice tightened the moment I read him the case number. "Dad, that's not even a real docket number." And I sure as hell didn't sign off on anything like that. Right then, I knew things were deeper than a neighborhood feud. This fake HOA had taken their little power trip and turned it into something much more dangerous, impersonating law enforcement, forging legal documents, and using intimidation tactics on residents who dared to question them. I wasn't the first, but it seemed like I was becoming their biggest problem, and someone on their side had gotten bold enough to use my own family as a weapon. As I watched through the blinds, the men kept talking among themselves, glancing at their watches, and occasionally looking toward the street. It started to feel like they were waiting for someone else, maybe backup, or someone they thought had real authority. That's when I noticed a familiar car slowly roll by. It was my neighbor Tanya's. She's lived across from me for years, and recently mentioned she'd joined the new HOA board. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now I started to wonder if she knew more than she let on. The neighborhood wasn't just divided, was being manipulated from the inside. People I'd trusted for years were suddenly siding with this fake HOA, either out of fear or some promise of control. And with fake cops, forged warrants, and quiet alliances forming all around me, I realized I was standing in the middle of something bigger than a simple dispute over property rules. I was in a battle for the truth, and the line between neighbors and enemies was starting to blur. I stayed by the window, heart racing, trying to piece together what was really happening. My son had already told me he was calling the sheriff's office directly real law enforcement, not the Halloween costumed clowns outside. Meanwhile, the fake officers grew more restless. One of them pulled out a walkie-talkie, muttering something too low for me to hear, and the other kept scanning the street like he was waiting for a signal. It wasn't just a scare tactic anymore. They were stalling, and that meant someone else was involved. My gut told me it wasn't over yet. A few neighbors started peeking out from behind curtains, and I noticed Tanya now standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. She didn't look surprised. In fact, she looked satisfied, like this was part of a plan she already knew about. That's when I remembered something weeks ago. Tanya had mentioned she worked in document services downtown, in a casual conversation at the mailbox. At the time, it meant nothing, but now it clicked. She had access to paper, to seals, to city letterheads. Suddenly, the forged warrant didn't feel so random. I kept the phone on speaker as my son updated me. His tone had shifted. He was angry now, not just as a judge, but as my son. "Dad, this isn't just impersonation. This is a felony. They messed with the wrong family." He told me not to confront them yet, to stay safe. Help was on the way, but every second felt like a ticking clock. The fake officers began pacing, clearly sensing things weren't going as planned. Then a fourth car pulled up, a sleek black sedan. Out stepped a man in a suit with a clipboard in one hand and what looked like another document in the other. He walked with purpose, barely glancing at the others. When he reached the door, he rang the bell 3 times, sharp, deliberate. I didn't answer. I just stood behind the door, listening. Something told me whatever was about to happen next would change everything. I stood frozen behind the door, heart pounding with every echo of those 3 knocks. Something about the man in the suit felt different, more dangerous. He didn't look like a neighbor playing dress-up or someone bluffing with a fake badge. No, this guy had an air of confidence. That made me uneasy. Through the peephole, I watched him flip open his clipboard, glance down, and then casually turn toward the fake officers, whispering something that made all 3 of them instantly straighten up. It was like watching soldiers snap to attention. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a neighborhood scam anymore. These people were organized. Just as I reached for my phone to text my son again, it buzzed in my hand. It was him, texting in all caps, "Dad, do not open the door. That guy is under investigation." I blinked at the screen, rereading it, my stomach dropping. Somehow, my son already knew who that man was. I didn't have time to ask how. Seconds later, the suited man knocked again, this time, once. Then, to my shock, he turned and walked around the side of my house. My security camera feed on my phone lit up, showing him heading straight toward the back gate. I rushed to lock it before he got there, but halfway across the living room, I heard the gate creak open. Not forced, unlatched. I had forgotten to bolt it after taking the trash out earlier. I cursed under my breath. This wasn't a fake warrant situation anymore. This was an attempted illegal entry. Outside, my motion light flipped on. On my phone screen, I could see the man scanning the backyard like he was looking for something specific. He wasn't trying to serve a notice, he was looking for evidence. Or worse, planting it. That's when I realized they weren't here. Because of me, they were here for something, or someone. And that someone might not even be me. Suddenly, everything made less sense and more danger. This fake HOA, the phony police, the forged warrant with my son's name, it was all part of something bigger, something I hadn't seen coming. And now, I was in the center of it. I darted to the back door just as the man in the suit reached for the handle. But before he could twist it, flashing red and blue lights lit up the entire street. Real police cruisers pulled in from both ends of the block, cutting off the SUV. And the fake HOA goons before they could even think of leaving. The man froze. He didn't even flinch, just calmly put his hands up and turned toward the lights like he knew this moment was coming. Within seconds, officers surrounded my property. One of them, a woman I recognized from a previous town meeting, approached me and said, "Your son gave us a heads up. We've had eyes on this group for a while. You just gave us what we needed." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or shocked. Apparently, my son had already tipped off internal investigators after hearing whispers about forged judicial documents being passed around in property disputes. He didn't think it would hit so close to home, literally. The 3 fake officers were cuffed on the spot, and their so-called warrant confirmed as a complete fabrication. The SUV was filled with fake badges, HOA flyers, and even a printer, still warm from recent use. As for the man in the suit, the officers didn't even question him on the scene. They knew who he was. He wasn't just a hired actor or scammer. He was a suspended paralegal under federal investigation for impersonating legal officers and running fake HOA enforcement across multiple counties. But here's the twist. I didn't expect one of the officers pulled me aside and said, "Sir, you're going to want to take a look at this." He handed me a folder recovered from the SUV. Inside were documents with my name, my property layout, even interior photos of my house. Not from today old photos, ones I never took. That's when I remembered the drone I spotted weeks ago, hovering just long enough to make me uncomfortable. I'd brushed it off. But now I realized someone had been planning this long before today, and while the fake HOA might be gone, someone else had clearly been watching. That night, after everything had quieted down and the last cruiser left the street, I finally sat down and took a breath. My hands were still a little shaky, but I felt a strange mix of relief and realization. The fake HOA police had been exposed. The forged warrant traced back to a network of scammers pretending to enforce bogus/neighborhood rules in exchange for hush money and control. My son's name was cleared, and his actions actually helped. Law enforcement built a stronger case that had been in the works for months. What started as a strange HOA dispute turned out to be part of a larger operation targeting vulnerable homeowners. A few days later, real investigators came by to finish collecting evidence. They confirmed the man in the suit had been running a shell company tied to multiple fake HOAs in different cities. The people involved were mostly neighbors who had been promised small payouts or positions of influence in exchange for going along with the plan. Tanya, the neighbor across the street, was arrested too. It turned out she'd been forging city seals at her workplace and funneling them to the group behind the scenes. That betrayal stung the most. In the end, the documents found in that SUV helped authorities link the group to over 24 attempted scams. My home became a turning point in the case, and I was told the story would likely help other communities spot red flags. As for me, I installed better cameras, changed all the locks, and started walking the block again, not out of fear, but to remind my neighbors that the best defense is being informed and connected. And while this chapter is finally closed, I'll never forget the moment those fake cops came for me with my own son's name. They thought they had the upper hand. Turns out they knocked on the wrong door.